Hello and welcome to Gefet Gemara. I'm Yael Shimoni, bringing to you together with Fadran in Yeshivat Drisha, learning Ki'ut, Daf Yomi, also a bit of Iyun, and we're starting a new parak this week, Eilu Tereifot. It's a hard parak, known for it being hard, and as you can see, there are many pictures that can help you with the physical parts of the parak. But what I want to do today is really to look at the opening sugya that is dealing with something that is very central that will repeat itself later. And that is the question, can a tereifa live? And to see that there is chachamim, also amoraim and tanaim, that think that even if behema or a chaya is tereifa, they can still be alive. And that's opposition to what has been paskin per halacha, is that if there's a tereifa, it dies after a year. So this starts in our sugya. Let's look through it, and we'll see a few comments, very interesting comments in the Rishonim. And we will finish in an interesting comment of the Ramban on the sugya, which is a famous comment and actually a surprising one. So now that you know where we're headed, we can begin. We're in Chullin Mebed Amud Aleph, and the Mishnah starts by listing the whole list of tereifot. But I'm not going to read the whole list. I'm just going down to the bottom of the Mishnah. And the Mishnah sums it up and says, "Ze haklal, kol she'en kamohu chaya, tereifa." Okay, what does this sentence mean? So according to the Gemara, this sentence means that the Mishnah thinks that if any animal has these tereifot, it will not survive. Let's see how the Gemara develops here. So the Gemara starts by a memra of Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish, that here the Gemara will rebuff and say it's really problematic. We will see it actually in a different way in the Rambam soon. But let's see what Reish Lakish says. Amar Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish, remez letrefa min haTorah minayin. That's the memra. Okay, so Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish says there is a hint, there is a remez for the din of tereifa in the Torah. Now this is very strange, as we will see, because why does Reish Lakish think that it's not written straightforward in the Torah? Okay, which is what the sugya is going to ask presently and actually say we have to reclaim the memra. But we'll see that the Rambam actually will help us understand this line soon. Okay, so the Gemara anyway says, Minayin? Ubasar b'sadeh tereifa lo tochelu. What do you mean? This is a pasuk. It says in the Torah the word tereifa. Ubasar b'sadeh tereifa lo tochelu. Now, as you will soon see, this pasuk doesn't really mean basar b'sadeh tereifa, the list of the tereifot that we have in the Mishnah. This really means something else. Basar b'sadeh tereifa really means if I meet an animal that is dying in the field because another animal tried to eat it. Specifically the tereifa of drusa. But it doesn't talk about all these tereifot that we had before, right? There's a whole list here. ניקב הלב, נשברה השדרה, נפסק הראש, ניטל הכבד, הריאה שנקבע. No, we're talking about here drusa. But here the Gemara says, what do you want? The word tereifa is in the Torah. Why does Reish Lakish say it's a remez? So the Gemara changes Reish Lakish and says that's not what Reish Lakish said. What does Reish Lakish say? Meaning Reish Lakish is saying, how do you know from the Torah that if you have one of the tereifot, it means that you will not survive? So according to the Gemara, Reish Lakish is one of the Amorim that thinks that a tereifa will not survive. It doesn't say for how long, but a tereifa will not survive. Obviously, shorter life than usual. And he thinks it's hinted in the Torah. Where is it hinted in the Torah? The katan Tereifa, ze haklal. Kol she'en kamel chaya, tereifa. Nichlal de tereifa ena chaya. So here we see an interesting way of reading the Mishnah. The Mishnah said, Kol she'en kamohu chaya, tereifa. So here the Gemara says, don't read it chaya, animal. Read it chaya, alive. Any animal that is not alive is tereifa. Where does Mishnah bring this idea? Says the Gemara, Minalan, dichtiv vezot hachaya asher tochelu chaya echol she'ena chaya lo tochal nichlal de tereifa lo chaya. Okay, so here we're seeing this playfulness with the word chaya. Chaya is double meaning. One meaning is an animal, the other meaning is living, and it's hinted in the Torah that a tereifa is actually not living. Good. Now the Gemara continues and says, Shkoyach, aval leman de'amar tereifa chaya minale. Okay, all this is according to the one who thinks that tereifa is not chaya, but we have a different line of Rishonim, a different line of chachamim, that the Gemara is not saying who they are, that think that a chaya, a tereifa, will actually live. So how do they read the pasuk? How do they read the pasuk? V'zot hachaya asher tochelu. They have a different way of reading. ולמאן דאמר טרפה חיה, מנהלי, נפקא ליה מזאת החיה אשר תאכלו. זאת החיה יכול, חיה אחרת לא תאכל. Meaning, this other idea doesn't think that a tereifa will actually die. So how does it read the pasuk? The pasuk is not talking about living or dying. It's just talking about which animals you can eat. Zot hachaya asher tochelu. This one and not the other, because we have the word zot. So the Gemara continues and says, wow, that's true. There's the word zot. So how does Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish read the word zot? Ve'idach, hay zot, ma yavid lei? Says the Gemara, מבאי אליי לחדתניא דבר רבי ישמעאל. דנה דבר רבי ישמעאל, זאת החיה אשר תאכלו, מלמד שתפס הקדוש ברוך הוא מחול מן מין והראה לו למשה. ואמר לו זאת תאכול, וזאת לא תאכול. Okay, so here we have the answer that according to Reish Lakish that says that a tereifa will not live, he takes the word zot and says the word zot doesn't mean that God showed them these specific animals. It means something else. What does it mean? That God did not only show them which animal, he caught each animal, each kind, and showed Moshe physically. So here, before we'll continue, there's a cool Tosafot saying that if you remember, I did a Gefet a few months ago about the menorah in Menachot, that Tosafot here quotes. In Menachot it says that there were a few things that God actually showed Moshe in his finger. The three things were menorah, Rosh Chodesh, and Shratim. And the Tosafot asks, why didn't the Midrash bring two other factors? One of them is Machatzit shekel, that we have a Midrash saying that God also pointed at Machatzit shekel. And also, why didn't the Gemara there in Menachot bring this drasha of Zot HaChaya Asher Tochelu? And the Tosafot says you have to understand these two things, Machatzit shekel and the Chayot. It's not that Moshe didn't understand how they look like. No, but he had a different issue there of a different kind. So the Tosafot says what was the problem with Machatzit shekel is because it was hard for Moshe to understand how can Machatzit shekel be something that actually can be mechaper on our souls. So God told him in Manasot that's just the way it is. And it seems that Moshe also had a problem understanding why would this animal be okay and this animal would not be okay. So that's why God had to convince him and to show it to him. So it wasn't a problem in recognizing or understanding like you had in the menorah and Rosh Chodesh and Shratim. This is more of a deeper problem. How could this be? So here we have the Tosafot, and again, this drasha is only for those who think like Reish Lakish that tereifa does not live. But now I want to give most of our time in the Gefet to understand who are these cholkim and what is an nafka between those who think that a tereifa is chaya and a tereifa is not chaya. Those who think that an animal who has all these problems can still live and also live for how long, and those who think that she will die quickly. So first of all, Rashi tells us, in order to understand who are the people who are cholkim here, you have to go to Chullin Daf Zayin Amud Bet. We'll do that mamash in a moment, and we'll see. And Rashi says you will see that there, those who think that a tereifa lives, think that it doesn't live forever, but it lives for 2 or 3 years. Let's read it in Rashi. למאן דאמר טרפה חיה, לקמן בפרקים, חולין דף זין עמוד ב', אמרו לו, והלא 4 מתקיימות 2 ו3 שנים. So the ad that says that a tereifa lives means it lives more than 1 year. And therefore we understand that the ad, Reish Lakish, is the ad that says that after a year, this animal will not survive. But now I want us to look at a very important statement in the Rashba that we see it also in other Rishonim. Because you might ask yourself, what is the nafka between these two ideas? I mean, why do I care halachically if the animal lives or the animal doesn't live after a year? So says the Rashba, something very interesting. The nafka is in safek tereifa. Let's read the Rashba. ונפקא מינה לספק טרפה, שאם נתקיימה י"ב חודש, אין חוששים לה, וכשרה מעתה. So it's very important to know that the Rashba was very adamant about the fact that the halacha is according to the de'ah that tereifa does not live more than a year. The Rashba doesn't think that there's a safek or you can change anything. Here, the Rashba is talking about something else. Not if you have a vadai tereifa. If we know that this animal has one of the problems that we know for sure, that she has one of the problems enlisted in the Mishnah, we know it's going to die in a year. And even if it will live, we don't care. But what the Rashba says is, what happens if we have a safek tereifa, meaning we think that maybe she has one of the problems in the Mishnah, but we're not sure. Says the Rashba, there's a big nafkamina between these two de'ot. According to Rish Lakish, that he says, if an animal has one of these problems, it will die in a year. If we have a safek about the animal, we will wait a year. And if the animal doesn't die, it's kosher. Because living after a year is a chazaka that is mevatel the safek. But if we'll be pasking according to Lemad Amal, tereifa lives, even after a year, the animal will still be not kosher because the safek has not been cleared, and this is safek d'oraisa lechumra. So it's interesting to notice that what seems to be the more mekel, it's not really more mekel. Like saying that you can live with all these problems really means that halachically you're more machmir. Why? Because when you have a safek about the animal, you will not be able to clear that safek in a year, and maybe only in 3 years, I don't know, maybe 4. Anyway, you're still being safek d'oraita, and the animal will remain not kosher, even if you only have a safek over its head. And therefore, maybe halachically, we should be happy that we're pasking that tereifa lo chaya, because that allows us to clear the safek after a year. Okay, so before we go to Daf Nun Zayin, as Rashi warmly offered us to do, let's see what the Rambam has to say about the sugya. And as I told you, the Rambam here has an interesting statement about the first line of the sugya. So I'm returning to the first line. The first line of the sugya said that Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish said, "Remes tereifa min Torah minayin," and the Gemara said, "What are you talking about? It's obvious that the tereifa is min Torah." And now let's go read the Rambam. And the Rambam says in Hilchot Shchita, Perek Hei Halacha Gimel, "Af al pi shekulan halacha leMoshe miSinai hen ho'il ve'en lecha beferush b'Torah ela drusa החמירו בה. וכל ספק שיסתפק בדרוסה אסור. ושאר 7 מיני טרפות יש בהן ספקים מותרים כמו שיבואר. So actually, according to Rambam, what Reish Lakish said, the first line is also true, because tereifa is not specifically written in the Torah. What's really written in the Torah is what the Rambam says here is drusa, an animal that was almost eaten up by another animal but survived. That, if the animal went through that, any safek in that kind of tereifot will be lechumra. Because, says the Rambam, that's beferush in the Torah. Now, the rest of the sfekot, it doesn't mean they're not deraisa. They're halacha leMoshe miSinai. But the Rambam says, because they're halacha leMoshe miSinai, they're only in remez, some of their sfekot will be lekula. Now, we're not doing Iyun here, of course. It is very interesting to continue reading the Rambam. I'm just showing you this Rambam, and if you have time, you can go and read Rambam Perek Hei Halacha Gimel, of the Rambam, and see how he develops this idea. But now I want to move forward and see that as Rashi said, if we open to Chullin Nun Zayin Amud Bet, we'll have more information about who are in the machloket, and we'll see what were the different de'ot regarding this question: does a tereifa live? Okay, so here in Chullin Daf Nun Zayin Amud Bet, which you will reach soon, says Rav Huna, Amar Rav Huna, Siman letereifa Yud Bet Chodesh. So Rav Huna says, how do I know if I'm in a safek, if something is tereifa or no? I wait for a year and then I know if it's tereifa or not. This is exactly what the Rashba said. Safeka is cleared after a year. Says the Gemara, Meitive, how can Rav Huna says this? We have a brisa that is kushia on him. What is the kushia? So let's see what's in the brisa. There are a few de'ot, and none of them is collaborating with Rav Huna. Siman letereifa kol shena yoledet. So here we have a different way of finding out if somebody is a safek tereifa, but it only helps you with women. Only helps you with female animals. And female animals, if they give birth, then we know that they're not tereifa. And it doesn't say after a year; it says after giving birth. Okay, so that's not Rav Huna. רשב"ג אומר, משבחת והולכת בידוע שהיא כשרה, מתנוונת והולכת בידוע שהיא טרפה. So Rashbag says, look at the animal. If it's degrading, so that's tereifa. If it's becoming more healthy, then it's bria. Again, this is not Rav Huna. And Rabbi Omer, siman tereifa 30 yom. Rabbi doesn't think it's a year, he thinks it's a month. And Chachamim say, אמרו לו, והלא הרבה מתקיימות 2 או 3 שנים. So these Chachamim say that you can't use a month, but obviously you can't also use a year because most of them actually live more than a year. Says the Gemara, it's okay. Rav Huna has a different shita of Tanaim that thinks like him. Who is a Tanam who thinks like Rav Huna? Let's see. Tanaihi Detanya. ובגולגולת שיהיה בנקב אחד ארוך, אפילו נקבים הרבה, מצטרפים למלוא מקדח. Okay, one of the tereifot is if you have a hole in the skull, either a long hole or many holes together, that's also a tereifa. In the Brisa, that's how it opens up. How does this connect to Rav Huna? Let's see the story in the Brisa. Amar Rabbi Yossi ben HaMeshulam, Maaseh b'Inbul, a place called Inbul, be'echad, a man, this is not an animal, this is a man, be'echad shenifcheta gulgalto. This is interesting to notice that the same simanei tereifot in men are the same simanei tereifot in animals. Okay, so there you had a man that actually was injured in his skull and he had this opening in the skull. And what happened? ועשו לו חידוק של קרויה. Okay, they took, it sounds like it's a part of, wait, how do you call this? How do you say דלת באנגלית? Pumpkin. Okay, קרויה is a pumpkin. They took a dried pumpkin and they closed the hole in his skull with a dried pumpkin and he lived. אמר לו רבי שמעון בן אלעזר, משם ראיה, ימות החמיה, וכיוון שעברו עליו ימות הצינה, מיד מת. So Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar says that's not a proof that you had a man that lived with this hole in his skull because he lived only in the summer and then when winter came he died. So this, according to the Gemara, is the Shitat Tanaim that Rav Huna is built upon. So now we understand that Rav Huna did not talk about Yud Chodesh, meaning the time of 12 months, but it's actually going throughout summer and winter and the different nature changes of a year. That's what it sounds like in the sugya. As when we'll get there, you see there are different deot in the Rishonim about exactly understanding Rav Huna, but in a simple way, we see that here it's not about time, it's about going through weather changes of an entire year. And Rav Huna thinks that if you go through a whole year cycle, you will for sure die if you have any one of those problems. And that is the machloket that we have. Okay, so now we understand much better the two deot that we have in the first sugya. But I'm sure you have a question in your minds. And what's very cool about that question is that Ramban asked that question, even though he was years before us. And the question is simple. Why didn't they check? Okay, let's do a scientific experiment. Just check. Do these animals die or do they live? Now, maybe you think that this question is not relevant to the Gemara because the Gemara is before science developed and there were no scientific experiments on animals. But what's interesting is that the Ramban asks this question, and the Ramban, it was before Francis Bacon, he was before this whole history of science developed into actually empirical checking of whether or not something lives or not. And the Ramban is earlier than that, and still he asks the question that you have in your mind. So let's see what the Ramban phrasing the question. Says the Ramban, that is Chidushei Ramban on our sugya. מה שנחלקו חכמי ישראל בטרפה, אם היא חיה או אינו חיה. This machloket that we have in the Gemara. Does it live or doesn't it live? תמוה הוא, איך לא בדקו הדבר בניסיונות הרבה? Why didn't they just try and do a lot of empirical checking, ניסיונות, and see? Says the Ramban, his answer, אפשר שקימו מן הטרפות שמלאכה למשה מסיני, פעם אחר פעם, ומצאו שלא היו מתקיימות בבית חודש. So first answer of the Ramban is, how do you know? Maybe they actually did do this. He says, אפשר, maybe they actually checked it out. But says the Ramban, even if they did check it out, it didn't help them to solve the machloket. Why? אפשר שקימו מן הטרפות שמלאכה למשה מסיני, פעם אחר פעם, ומצאו שלא היו מתקיימות בבית חודש, ואף על פי כן, מי שראיית חוכמתו או קבלתו נותנת לו שהיא חיה, אינו חוזר בו, שהרי אמור שמתה ממקרה, Says the Ramban, even if you'll bring 100 animals, 1,000 animals that have these tereifot and they die, if I am convinced because I have a Kabbalah, or I'm sure that the animal should live, I don't care if 1,000 animals died. Why? Because it could be that it died by a different cause. Why are you so certain that she died because of this cause of tereifa? Maybe she had other problems. Maybe that's what killed her. It's not enough to prove if an animal that had one of these problems died that this is the cause of death. Because it's very clear that if we had just only this problem in this animal, it would live. So this doesn't prove anything. So that's how the Ramban asks the questions and answer the question. And he says, listen, empirical science won't help you, because even if you have 1,000 animals, still, it's very hard to determine the cause of death and to say this is what killed the animal. It could be 100 other things. And the Ramban, which is years after the Ramban, repeats the same question, and he has two slight differences from the Ramban. Okay, so let's see the first difference is that the Ramban says that it's not maybe they tried, that indeed they did. Remember, the Ramban said efshar shebatku, but the Ramban will say that's what they did. Let's say ואם תאמר ואך נחלכו חכמי ישראל בדבר שאפשר לעמוד עליו, ישבו את הטרפות בת חודש לראות אם הם חיות או לא. Check it out. יש לומר שכבר שיעור, they actually did it, not אפשר, they actually did it. יש לומר ששיעור מהם הרבה ולא יהיו מתקיימות, ואפילו הכי, מי שאומר טרפה היה מדרך קבלתו, מדרך חוכמתו, לא היה חוזר בו. And here the Ramban adds a few of the explanations that you can say when you have an animal die, even if it has a trefa. Why will that not be convincing? שהיה יכול לומר במקרה מתה ולא שיכול להיגרם בה. או שהיה תולה ואומר, אילו היה טבעה חזק, הייתה מתקיימת. Okay, says the Ramban, you bring me an animal that dies, maybe it's because it's a weak animal. Okay, maybe if it would be strong, it would be a different story. And it's interesting, like, let's say now we put the animals in better conditions, give them better food, protect them from cold and heat, they'll survive, right? When something kills you, it has to be that thing. And it could be a lot of other things that are just about how strong you are. So anyway, here we have this question in the Ramban and in the Ran, and we see that empirical evidence is not really a good way to find out the cause of death of animals, and therefore the machloket is a machloket in psukim, and actually any empirical proof will not be enough to be machriya this machloket, at least not to decide that if it dies, that it's a proof that it dies, because if something died, it could be b'mikra for many different reasons, and it's not enough to say that all the tereifot die after Yibet Chodesh, and it's really the machloket. Now it's true that the psak halacha is that a tereifa dies after Yibet Chodesh, but here we see it's a machloket, and it's a machloket that is still in the Mishnah and Rav Huna and the Ikad Amri that we have in our Gemara, and this is a good way to open this long period that you have in front of you, and I hope you'll have good learning and good understanding. And I hope you enjoyed the fact that the Ramban and the Ran asked such an easy question. It seems to be a modern question, and here we can find it in the Rishonim themselves. So happy learning with you today, and I hope to meet you soon again. Take care.